Anastasia, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. So let's go straight to it. So you are the founder and CEO of Stellar Amenities. So perhaps you can tell me and the audience, what is a space architect? So let's start from the basics.
Yeah, sure. So space architect is someone who works on the space habitats itself, the structure of the space stations, the lunar and Martian habitats. But also space architect is someone who designs interior solutions for that. So it's like pretty much wherever goes to a space habitat, that's a job of space architect. Not just not just space architect, but many other people, including systems engineers, life support system experts, so many more. So it's not just the job of space architect. Yeah.
Great. So what is the difference between space architecture and space interior designs? Because on Earth, you think of architecture, well, I think of architecture and I think of like physical structures of buildings, and interior design is more like the fixtures, fittings, and finishes within inside the building. Is that the same thing, or is space architecture more sort of symbiotic?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, basically what happens is that, on Earth we have, I think that the way how architects express themselves is through the facade and the interior design, like the way it look, the way we perceive the building, the way you feel yourself being inside. Um, and we don't necessarily have many restrictions with that here on Earth, but in space, you have to first make sure like it fits, like whatever you come up with, wherever you what kind of ideas. Sorry, there's like a pop-up window.
Sorry,
Whatever comes up to one moment.
don't worry.
That window distracted me.
It's okay. We can
Yeah,
edit it out.
in space architecture, we are. What's up?
We can edit it out, so don't worry. So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
yeah,
I
so
remember
so yeah.
that. So that, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so what's the main difference between like I'll keep my first question, but like what is the main difference between space architecture on Earth and in space, and like architecture versus interior design, like how they differ?
Yeah, yeah. So the main difference is that normally what we care about on Earth is the way how the building makes us feel. The facade is really important, the way it feels like in the interior space. And normally architects don't have many restrictions, and in the process of designing architecture for Earth, you come up with a concept. It's normally architects working on it, and then the engineers come up with ideas how exactly you're gonna build it. um, but in space architecture, it's quite reversed. In space architecture, we see that we first want to know the restrictions, like we want to know what exactly we're designing for. For instance, it's a mission to Mars, 4 astronauts, 3 years on a space habitat. What exactly is going to, what kind of mission it is? Is it a research mission or is it a space tourism mission? Is it what's the biggest objective? So it's like the first thing is to really make sure that you want to address the biggest problems of that interior design. um, and then you are you working. So space architect is really a combination of engineer and architect and artist, I would say. Because you first, you see restraints and constraints of the environment. You think about how it's going to be shipped, how it's going to be transported. Is it going to be already part of a space habitat? For example, I'm talking about tables or like storage solutions, right? Or is it going to be something that's going to be sent later on as a payload? And then basically, figure out the constraints and then you design around those constraints. And in terms of the exterior and the interior design in space, it's kind of doesn't matter, like the exterior space, because astronauts spend almost 100% of time indoors, except for doing EVA sometimes, right? And
Hmm.
space architecture in space, it's a vessel that have to keep you alive. So the exterior, it's like it's not that important.
Yeah,
But interior is really important because you want to combine the indoors and outdoors into the interior of spacecraft because astronauts don't experience those stimuli they've experienced in nature. They've experienced, walking on the street. You probably never think about, but when you walk on a street, you feel the sun, you feel the wind against your skin. Um, on the space station doesn't happen. Um, so one of the things that we do at Staromintius is really like recreating these multi-sensory experiences, recreating the artificial wind, the directionality of it, the sunlight. There's many problems to tackle. So I would say that for architecture here on Earth, it's it's less restraining. It's more liberating, I would say. But space architecture has to solve specific problems. It's extremely strategy focused. It's extremely focused on the bringing the biggest ROI, return on investment,
of course,
to
yeah.
stakeholders. There's going to be astronauts, investors, like anyone.
So you mentioned, I mean, this is fascinating to me, because thinking about a long trip to Mars, you know, it's making sure that obviously the first and most important thing is that the crew are safe, but also they've got to arrive in a sane state of mind. They've got to be productive, and you don't want them feeling the separation from Earth so much that they break down and start to kill each other. I've obviously seen too many sci-fi films, but the artificial wind thing fascinates me because it's like thinking about how technology can bring elements of nature into the habitat. So, do you think things like digital fish tanks and you mentioned smell, like how important are those? How important are bringing the senses into a spaceship for those long missions? I'm thinking of in another a good film, Interstellar. When they come out of their 6 month nap to Saturn, and the first thing they do is listen to bird noises on the earpods that kind of grounds them back to Earth and reconnects with the sounds of the Earth. So yeah, how important is technology in bringing nature into spacecraft?
Yeah, like you brought up this scene from Interstellar. That's something, it's not like coming from sci-fi, it's something that is coming from the stories, actual stories of astronauts. There were a few stories on that. There's one during the era of Soviet spacecraft. I think it was in Station Mir. Um, there were astronauts living for a long time, don't remember how long, but then there was like new payload coming along to the space station, and one of the payload was like fresh onions. And one of the astronauts, he was like, "Oh, all right, I'm gonna eat the onion like an apple." So
Hmm.
he ate it, and it was delicious because it had this fresh smell. Uh, but also at the same time, when you're in space, there's something happening to you that you can't really smell the same way as you smell here on Earth. So it's less vivid. So I would say that the freshness of onion like kind of removed all this not nice things about onion, which make you cry and stuff. But kind of he described it as that he ate it as an apple and felt like it was an apple.
Hmm.
So that's interesting. Um, we actually, smell is really a big thing too. Astronauts, they actually record some noises on Earth and they use it in space before they go to sleep, like the sound of rain, the sound of birds. Astronauts also report that they miss the smell of fresh grass and like
Hmm.
when it's raining, there is this smell of freshly rained asphalt or like rocks, like a so that those are really something that astronauts miss so badly and something that we never really pay attention to.
Yeah.
And with a longer duration space mission, it's critical to include those yeah, it's critical to include those sound and smell to really make sure that astronauts don't go insane. I mean, it's not just sci-fi that everything goes wrong. It's even NASA Human Research Program says, NASA Human Research Program is a program that focuses solely on the human performance and well-being in space. And so they say that, the second biggest risk towards human access to space is crew behavioral health,
Mm.
meaning that whatever happens, like maybe a small crisis, small scandal can really
Ignites everything. Yeah.
multiply by, yeah, delayed work, and then, the relationship can be also hardened by it. But the first problem in human access to space is radiation, which is getting solved. So you can see now like how big of a deal is that, how big of a deal to support productivity and well-being in space.
That's so interesting. Now, I'm not going to ask you what the most important thing is about design in space because I know that it's weight. Obviously that's the most important thing. Where when you know, every kilogram or pound of what you're sending to space costs money. But where do you look for inspiration from for space architecture? Do you look at like submarines and how they maximize space? Is that sort of part of how you sort of plan a theoretical room for
Yeah.
for a long space travel?
I would say now it's we entering the time when we can see the renaissance of a spacecraft and the human space flight. I think it's the time to design some prolific things. And the way how space station, International Space Station submarines are designed, that's not definitely my inspiration and our inspiration in general.
Hmm.
I try to look at the multidisciplinary things. I get inspired by art. I get
Hmm.
inspired by performance art too. It might not be sound obvious, but you can find some things that can really drive your design. For instance, I get inspired by a movement called metabolism, which is this really not that known Japanese art and architecture movement. I think it was 1960s, 1970s, and they were thinking that architecture is a bioorganism, is something that can grow, and the cities have to grow like our bodies, right? And you probably know this. You probably know this architecture piece called Nakagin Capsule Hotel. Sorry, a tower. It's in Tokyo. It got recently demolished, but really as a symbol of metabolism. The way how this building is structured is that you have different types of cubes like stacked on each other, and each cube represents apartment, right? And
Hmm.
extremely small. But at the same time, the whole idea is that once the one of the cubes get outdated, you can replace it, right? So it's like really interesting idea, really applicable to space industry. But in terms of like other inspirations, you look at the nature, it's like the best inspiration ever. Biophilic design is also a huge inspiration to us because we also think about how we can recycle things that we bring to space, right? Because in space, everything gets recycled, even your urine and sweat, gets recycled to the point it's like clean water you can drink. And by the way, it's like the cleanest water that ever existed in our human
Hmm.
history, so there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but So like we were exploring recently with my team the algae 3D printing. Algae is the fastest growing plant on Earth, and it's really stowable. I mean, it's easy to store, it's easy to produce, and it actually can work as a biomaterial to create clothes, like a kind of creating bioplastic to create clothes, to create. Okay, I will pause it because sometimes it's loud, so we can
It's
cut
okay.
it.
I'm making
Um,
markers of where to edit it, so it's fine.
yeah, awesome.
So,
Um,
so before you founded
what was it?
Stellar
Yeah.
Amenities, you worked with MIT, Media Lab, NASA, the Mars Society, and other private aerospace companies. Can you speak about those experience and what Stellar is doing differently compared to them?
Yeah, yeah. So, my whole, sorry. Let me drink something.
That's right.
Awesome. So my whole journey started once I moved to the United States in 2018. I graduated with my urban planning degree from Russia, and I moved to the United States just to pursue space architecture because space architecture degree, official one, only exists in America, in Houston specifically. So that's like I never thought about, if I wanted to move to the United States or not. I knew that I have to be there. So I moved there, I mean here, and then as someone who is coming post-Soviet Union country, I didn't really have a lot of money, so I had to find a job as soon as possible. And I actually found a job on a local aerospace company called Excalibur Almas, and they have their own funny stories, but one of them is actually, you know, um, I was hired to design interior solutions for a like a Soviet space station that this American company had in their possession, like a flown Soviet space station, and that was quite funny and interesting, just because it had really old hardware, 1970s hardware, and you're trying to kind of imagine how this can work with newer technologies because the client wanted to eventually send the Soviet space station as a new space hotel, like, and the whole benefit of that, you use the old proven technologies, but at the same time he envisioned it in a way that it can have like more modern technologies like robotics, AI. So that's been interesting exploration. And Besides that, I try to get as much experience as possible while I'm in school. I'm someone who doesn't really like to study a lot. And you might be asking, okay, I got master's, right? I got bachelor, and I was probably one of the worst students. I just never liked to study because I was always questioning, is that if that person telling me true or what. So I'll try to really do self-analysis and read it myself, because sometimes teachers are not really the right people to teach the subject. So yeah, during my studies in Houston, that was only 1.5 year study. I also was really a great opportunity to work at MIT Media Lab on the self-assembling space habitat called Tesseract, and I was designing interior solutions for that. And the way it worked is there was no really calling for internship or any kind of visiting researcher opportunities, but I just messaged them saying, "Hey, I got some credentials. I think I can help you guys to add some value to this project, to mature it in some case, to really explore what exactly it means to build an interior for this expandable space station because it now can host, up to 10 people. So it means like, what do you do exactly with this volume, right?"
Mm.
So yeah, I got really lucky. I got MIT Media Lab, really exciting time. I worked with the director of the Space Exploration Initiative Lab, Ariel Eggblow. She now has her own startup on designing, self-assembling structures in space, real large structures, really exciting. Um, but it's been really exciting to work together, like utilizing the principles of origami, thinking about weight, as you said, thinking about how exactly you design vernacular architecture for space, right? And it just
Mm.
so happened that, we co-authored a paper with the former administrator of NASA, David Newman. She, was there. We, collaborated on this project and eventually published a paper that won the most prestigious award in space architecture. And I'm like, am I dreaming or what? It's been, yeah, it's the star team. It's been really amazing. But then, you might be asking, why I am where I am, and after working with many entities, is that while many entities they develop some conceptual ideas, some kind of playful ideas, envisioning how it may work, how it might not work. I just saw that NASA Human Research Program is actually looking to solve specific problems, like isolation, like how people interact with the team, with each other in a small environment, confined
Mm.
environment, and what do you do about the, recreating the smell and fresh taste of food? What exactly you do, right? And there were so many problems, and I realized that after working for many entities, it wasn't really that of matured stage where they were, and I just want to make impact. I just want to see the astronauts are actually feeling better and can stay longer in space, like as soon as possible within, this decade, within this 5 years. Because it might sound really fun, but it takes many years to send something to space. So that's why I'm saying in this decade. And some people would think,
Mm.
oh, it's not that fast. But that's reality.
No, that's so inspiring,
Uh,
and especially sort of coming to another country, and I'm really encouraged that there are definitely more female CEOs in the space industry, and I think we'll continue to see more every year that passes. Have you thought about how being a female CEO in the historically
yeah.
male-dominated industry has that made it harder, or has that sort of spurred you on?
Um, So, I got into space architecture, got interested for my first interest in 2016 when I discovered a Soviet space architect, a female Soviet space architect. I don't know any male space architects of that era. She designed the most beautiful interior solutions. You can Google her, Galina Balashova. I can send you more pictures on her designs, but that's who inspired me to pursue it, is how cozy she made those interiors. Sometimes you can see, you can look at those interiors and think, oh wow, people at that time were so naive. People thought that there's no like weightlessness, because that was like early 1970s. People had no
Mm.
idea there's like no gravity, and she actually designed it in a way that it kind of looks like Soviet Union apartment. It's kind of like has the green floor, kind of the bench and the ceiling, and like there's also paintings on the wall. So like, oh, it's so cozy, and it's also like kind of dreamy. But also, one of my mentors too. Her name is Constance Adams. She is probably one of the most renowned space architects. Unfortunately, she died because of cancer 3 years ago. I wanted to apprenticeship with her. Um, I wanted to help her finish her studies, because when I reached her out, she was already really, bedridden. And I messaged her on LinkedIn out of curiosity, like thinking how I can help her in anything. I can come, I can not getting paid, that's for sure, and she messaged me saying, you can come to me to Houston, stay in my house. I'm not gonna pay you, that's for sure. Food is gonna be provided. I just need, I have some unfinished business, like I have to write books and stuff. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of time. And then she
Mm.
said, I don't think you actually accept this invitation because, Novosibirsk, it's the place in Russia where I used to live. It's so far away from Houston. But I'm here to suggest because you asked. And in the last paragraph, she said, don't let any man to, sit in your seat to tell you what to do. Um, they will try. And at that time, I was quite surprised to hear it from her because I haven't had any problems like with male executives or male folks. I always will lead some initiatives out of my college. Even at that time, I would lead the team of architects, student architects, designing for international competitions. So I was quite surprised when she said it. But then, I moved here and I've been doing this company for almost 3 years, and I can hear that sometimes it happens. I don't really pay attention because I believe that in the universe, when you pay attention to something, it actually makes it more meaningful to you and to other people. So will not pay attention to someone who trying to minimize my effort,
Mm,
kind of try to kind of get their ego above mine or so. But I do, so one of my jobs as the CEO is also to inspire young girls to pursue STEM just because you know, uh, not so many people have tools, not so many people get this inspiration. And someone who didn't grow up watching space movies, someone who, my parents still against my career, right? So I don't really have a lot of support system, and I know how hard it could be without support system. So I'm trying to make sure I still allocate some time, giving talks to young girls and I mean boys, anyone, honestly
mm.
to pursue space careers because I'm really a clear example that I'm coming from the architecture background. I'm not rocket scientist. And the space has a job for everyone.
Completely. Well, and I think space architecture is definitely one that is kind of becoming a new sector in architecture. It's kind of really interesting. Um, it seems to be becoming more sort of popular in sort of home design. I noticed even in London and New York, the kind of there's a designer, Timothy Alton, and he's got some luxury furniture shops, and they have these like Apollo lunar module like capsules that they have in
Hmm.
restaurants and in retail shop fronts and stuff, and that is sort of trickling into society. And as we the Artemis program and private companies are opening up space and we go back to the moon and onto Mars, I imagine space architecture will become there'll be a lot more companies trying to get in there. But I'm hugely inspired by what you said about inspiring the next generation as well. And you've got to send me the details of that lady, and I'll share them in the show notes as well. So what's your ultimate goal for stellar amenities? Would you like to see one spaceship that is designed by you, or do you
Yeah.
have higher ambitions than that? What's your goal?
Yeah. Okay. I want to tell you a little story. So when I was 14, I got into existential crisis, right? I'm probably someone who overthinks things, like trying to find the meaning, the kind of the absolute meaning of life and why life exists, not just humanity, but any kind of life, and why it appeared on Earth, or like was the water is the one thing that actually helped it. And at that time, I just was thinking I cannot live a mundane life because life is such a interesting event that happens in such a short period of time for human life. And at that time, I was living in Russia in a coal mining city, and everybody was like just kind of this working class, industrial working class. And my parents wanted me to become a doctor, like all these professions that are, you know, sustainable in their opinion, that can bring a lot of money, and I didn't really care about it. I was finding myself in architecture, but I wasn't really. I was trying to see what would be the next level, would be the next level, and I realized that, as we live right now, Earth is such a small rock that we all live. Relatively, I mean, I'm talking about, relatively regarding the solar system and other systems, right? And we are here and we're not really protected from anything. I'm not talking about aliens, but any kind of existential, extinct events. Like, I was thinking if we can end up like dinosaurs. But anyways, and it really got me thinking that space architecture could be like a vessel for bringing humanity to multi-planetary level of its existence. And so I find in my work a lot of fulfillment, and that's kind of the reason I can work on this endlessly until I die, just because I really find a lot of meaning in what we do. But in terms of our next goal, or the ultimate goal, it's definitely, we kind of approaching this industry being big fish in a small pond. We're still definitely not a big fish in a small pond at this moment, but I believe that in space architecture, the way it is now, makes sense to focus on the product and the interior design, because, as an architecture firm focusing on space, I understand that in our expertise we cannot develop a space habitat because it's extremely engineering, like it's extremely complicated system that doesn't really need a lot of architecture input. But what goes inside that actually requires a lot of input. So we actually, official NASA supplier, and we supplement with products, through NASA. And that's what I see in the next 5 years. That's what our main focus is, supplementing with products that support human well-being in space. But then eventually, we have some concepts that we're developing right now too in parallel. Concepts on the deployable space habitats, inflatable space habitats. Again, it might not look like that sexy as you might see sometimes on the internet. People think about how it could look like. It, first of First of all, it's a vessel pressure. Sorry, it's a pressure vessel that has to withstand extremely huge weight of the, vacuum of space. So it has to be like this really specific shapes. Otherwise, it's not a vision. It's gonna be too heavy to launch. If you wanted to make like flat walls, rectangular, something,
Hmm.
something, and I'm talking about the moon and Mars and in space, like all these environments, it has to be a cylinder or this pill shape thing. And yeah, I believe a lot in inflatables, and I have professionals right now working in parallel on inflatables, kind of, coming up as a Bigelow Aerospace, but like more design oriented, because unfortunately Bigelow Aerospace doesn't exist anymore, but it really had a lot of potential. So that's where we're
Hmm.
going. But definitely, what you mentioned about this designers getting this inspiration from space and applying it to everyday life. We see these principles that we apply in space architecture can be applied to tiny housing, to small apartments, overpopulated places, right? So we are also developing, one of our division in a stealth mode right now. We're developing one of the divisions that are developing furniture for small apartments. So it's like kind of bringing more sustainable income and more like getting more people inspired with space architecture methodologies.
Hmm.
Um, because you learn so much from designing for spacecraft, because you have to use so many resources and kind of have to be inventive in this sense. And I can see a lot of benefits for Earth-based dwellings as well.
Fantastic. And I think you've sort of summarized it quite well, is that that's how the space industry survives and continues to grow, is when the benefits of space exploration are visible back on Earth to everyone. So thank you so much. You're an inspiration to all sorts of up and coming entrepreneurs in the future. Maybe there's one listening to this podcast, but I could talk to you forever. But maybe we'll touch base in a couple of years and see what you've been up to. But thank you very much, Anastasia.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben, so much. It was a pleasure talking to you and talk to you soon, hopefully. Mhm.